Welcome to Releasing Trauma, a Survivor's Podcast. I am your host, Tracy Osborne. I am a survivor of emotional bullying, rape, sexual assault, domestic abuse, and grief. After losing my husband in 2019, I set off on a new adventure to help other women release their trauma and create a life they can cherish. Each week, I will feature a guest expert or a survivor to share their stories, tips, wisdom, and more. The goal is so that you can take away even just the smallest nugget of information you can use in your life right now to make a change, and to remind you that you're not alone. There is life after trauma, and you can move from victim to thriver and create a life you can cherish. Welcome. Today I am talking with Alexandra Allred. She has been fighting like a badass girl all her life, let me tell you. Wait till you hear this. She battled dyslexia to become a reader and writer, took on hundreds of opponents as a competitive martial artist. She lobbied through a letter writing campaign for the female bobsled team to become an Olympic event, and competed while pregnant on the first U.S. women's bobsled team. And later, at the urging of Sports Illustrated, no less, she tried out for a female professional football team. Now, she's an advocate for equity and empowerment, and she has turned her attention to helping a new generation of young people to use a combination of self and situational awareness to protect themselves from people intent on doing them harm. So I am so excited to have you on the show today. Thank you for joining me, Alex.
No, thanks for having me. You're right. This is a very important topic, so I love it. Thank you.
It is for, women of all ages, but especially the younger ones who are still in that I am invincible mind frame.
Yeah. I know.
So you wrote a book, and I've got your book right here. It's called Awareness is Armor, and the link's going to be down in the show notes for those of you who are listening. So we'll make sure you can get a copy of it, because this is a really good book, and it's geared toward the younger reader, correct?
It is. That's why it's shorter. It's fast paced and it's shorter because, I thought I'm not going to overwhelm the readers with tons of information, because I just wanted action packed just so that they would read it, and I hope, have greater awareness.
Yeah, and it's a great, easy read, but it is so packed with stuff that even though it's an easy read, it's a powerful read. So definitely check out her book. But so in this book, well, you know what? You tell us about the book. What's inside of it?
Really, the way I set it up is I actually like the show What Would You Do? And so I sort of set up the book in that way, in that I took from actual headlines and real events, and in a few times something that I know personally, and I gave the scenario and then flipped it to what should the person have done if in the ideal world, and then what would you do? And then we talk about it. And I set it up in a way that this can be for an individual reader, or I hope groups. And the fun thing about that is I did it on a test group. And the fun thing about that was I had a group of my young college students where I teach, and I had them go through it. And a few of them who knew each other pretty well, one of them would speak up and say, well, I would have done such and such. And then like 2 or 3 other girls would go, are you kidding me? You're such a coward. You would not have done. And it opened up this dialogue where people were confronted with what they really think they would or their friend would have done. And that's the beginning. And really the idea on this is the pre-self-defense course. People will pay anywhere from $150 to $300 to take a self-defense class. Usually it runs about 2 hours. And the reality is so much happens in that class. You leave supercharged and energized, but then will you really remember the things that you learned 2, 6 months later, a year later? And the answer, unfortunately, is usually no.
No. Yeah.
So with this book, if we can at least start dialogue and think about stories and really put that in, that's my hope is readers will read this and then decide to go on and take some self-defense classes.
I love it. And, it's funny because I found myself going, what would I do? Okay, now, what I think I would do would be this. What I would like to think I would do is X, Y, Z, but what I would probably do is run like hell, or something like that. And so it did. It really got me thinking, like, okay, if I was in this situation, what would I do? How would I handle it? And more often than not, I really, if I had to be honest with myself, I would have been, what you call it, retractive.
Yeah. You know what? Well, you get an A+ for being honest, because that's the reality. And so so your listeners understand, I am a 4th degree black belt. And I've taught self-defense for free. I've given free classes of self-defense for over 20 years now. And I do it for free because usually the people who most need to take it would not spend that kind of money, and they put it to bills, of course. But so that's why I do that. Well, one of the things that I teach when I have bigger small groups is the difference between men and women is men get confronted with something and they puff up. Arms are out and they start posturing. Even if they know they have no chance of winning, they posture. But we as females are really, truly taught at an early age to become retractive, to kind of shrink back and be apologetic or sorry, or just hope someone else is going to swoop in and rescue you. And, so that's one of the things that I talk about, as you know, a lot in the book, because when a stalker or a predator is looking for their victim, one of the first things they look for, they don't want trouble. They want an easy mark. They don't want to have to fight too much. And so they're counting on us as a collective female whole to be retractive, because that works well for what they have in mind. So being big and loud is huge in self-defense.
Yeah, I was thumbing through the book here. I should probably just put it away, but I was thumbing through the book. And I know that there's been a couple of spots where, if I remember right, there was one about the woman who was being followed to her car by a man in a dark alley. And she finally turned around and just yelled at him. And the poor guy was just going to his car, who was parked behind her or something like that.
Yeah, you know what? I'm so glad you pulled that one out, because I teach that, and here's why. When I'm in classes, I teach this story because it's hilarious and it's awesome at the same time. So Leanne, she was a student of mine, and she was walking through in Fort Worth, Texas. There's a famous stockyards, which there's a lot of bars, and there's an alleyway. And so it was late at night. She was going back to her car late at night, alone through an alley, which she knows better. And this guy's behind her. And she kind of picks up her speed, and he picks up her speed, and she's getting more and more nervous. And later she told the class, she said, I thought about, what is Alex is always saying, just use your voice, just be crazy, be insane. Don't be what he wants you to be. And so she turned around and just came at him barking like a dog. I mean, and so of course he backs up for a second, then she turns and she runs to her car. And as she's fumbling with her keys, she looks out, and here he comes out of the alleyway, and she's, he's coming anyway. And she's fumbling to get in her car, and she finally gets in her car, and she looks up, and he's getting in the car behind hers. And of course she tells the story, and my entire class burst out laughing. And she was like, I'm so embarrassed. And even though I was laughing, I said, no, because you did it. And I asked her, I said, tell me the truth. After you did it, didn't you feel amazing? And she was like, yeah, I kind of did. And the biggest thing is, even though we all got a pretty good giggle over it, she now knows that when the chips are down, that's what she's about. That's what she can do. And that is the opposite of retractive. I mean, the fact that she did it. And so even though we were all laughing about it, she now knows that she possesses that ability to defend herself in that way, which is awesome.
Very awesome. And, you don't know. For all she knew, that guy had not good intentions in his mind. Right. And even though he was parked behind her, maybe he still didn't have good intentions in his mind. She has no idea,
but and the other thing is, I joke about it, but I always say, and he's going to think twice before he walks closer behind another woman again. Sort of a win-win for everybody, really.
Right, for sure. I want to touch on, because I know a lot of the listeners are parents, and which is why this is perfect. But I want to touch on cyber awareness, because that is the big thing. I mean, it's such a huge thing. We hear about it all the time. Girl runs off to meet boy turns out to be a 45-year-old man living in his mom's basement. Girl gets harmed, and they met online. And this was something that I preached to my girls constantly. Even now that they're 16 and 18, I still don't friend people you don't know for real in person. They may say that they're XYZ age, they're 15, they're 16, they're 17, whatever, and they may totally talk like you and all of that. That's how these people work. And I have preached this since I let them have a Facebook account. But you talk about the board group, and I never even really thought about this until I read the book. So let's touch on the board group, because I think that's huge.
It is. And so to all the parents and anyone else listening, we think, as you just identified, we think of the scariest scenario, which is your child is befriended online and agrees to meet a stranger. That's terrifying. But then there's also, we have deluded ourselves into thinking that our child is in their room, so they must be safe because they're in their room. So there was a group in the book I talk about in detail. There was a large group of men, and they were from all different states, including one in Canada. And throughout the country, this group of men came together with one goal in mind, which was to set up, and they set it up in a way that their program could pick up certain words of people online. And so they put in terms like bored, so bored, I'm F and then asterisk board. And so they put in all these different keywords, but clearly what they were doing was they put out a net to find a child who was alone and bored and ready to reach out. And so sure enough, a little girl, I think 13, if I remember right, 13-year-old girl had posted that she was bored. And so bingo, they got her. And so one of the guys initiates dialogue, and over time, they were able to befriend her, get her to feel safe. And eventually she thought she was talking to a boy her age. She had no idea that a large group of men were listening and watching. And so after time, he was able to convince her to send her nude pictures and start doing suggestive things on the camera. And she did. And eventually the FBI caught up to this group. But this happens every day, everywhere. And it could have been a 13-year-old boy, or it could be a group of 12 perverted men who are then getting pictures of your child naked and doing all kinds of acts when they think that they think it's just an intimate relationship with a new friend. And, and I always tell moms in particular, don't get caught up in my daughter would never do, because it doesn't even have to be that they take off their clothes or do sexual acts. It can be anything from just giving information where they live. And one of the other stories that I have is a guy followed a young woman who posted things on Instagram, and bit by bit, in looking at the pictures, he was able to pin down where she was, and he found her in person. He was able to stalk her.
The 12-year-old.
So what we put online is it's so critical that our kids understand that, and our parents understand that your child isn't safe just because they're in the next room, because they're in the next room physically, but they could be in 3 different countries,
right,
doing all kinds of things. The other thing I would love for your parents to know is I wrote this when I teach self-defense, and I even teach Girl Scouts of America, for example, in schools. I watch my language with the young kids, but when I have college age and up, I actually will pull young women up from the audience and have them attack me. And, that's okay. I put my 2 in the other room for that very reason. So when I pull someone up from an audience, and right off the bat, I will just hurl cuss words at her. And it's amazing to watch how taken aback physically, and emotionally she is when and I always say, what do you think your attacker is going to say really sweet nothings to you? And that's part of what makes us freeze up, is this person comes at us, not just physically, but they'll come at us saying words that we've never had somebody say to us before. And we don't know what to do with that information. So when I designed the book, I think maybe there's one cuss word in there, but I worded it in a way so that a 13-year-old could read the book.
Right.
But I still have some pretty hard information to read, and I would want a 13-year-old to read it with their parents so they could discuss things. But I fall short, just short of using cuss words because they're minors reading it. But yeah, that's another important thing, is to make your kids understand that it's not, it's pretty shocking when it comes at you.
And, and to go back to what you were saying, when you were talking about the moms who my daughter would never do something like that.
Yeah.
They probably normally wouldn't, but these men are smart.
Yes.
Sadly. And they groom them to the point where these girls think that they're in love or, whatever. And they do end up doing stuff that they would normally never, ever in a million years do.
Yeah. And that's the key right there, is because by way of being female, we tend to be really shocked when someone is coming at us in a less than nice way. And I don't mean just physically, but like you said, many times our girls aren't prepared for the idea of grooming. And they don't, even though we tell them 10 times over, they don't really think that it can happen to them, particularly if they're sitting in their own room. Mm-hmm. And so it's really easy to feel safe in your room. And then before you know it, you've got this friendship and you start sharing intimate secrets or personal private information like a mailing address or more. And the grooming thing, in my mind, grooming is just as sick and pervasive as the stalker in the street.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. I want to talk, we've got a few minutes left, and I wanted to ask you a question, actually, about something that you wrote in here. And it was when you were talking, it's toward the end of the book, when you're talking about the Uber and what she would do. And, you give 3 tips. This is what you need to do. And your first one, and this is my question: first, open the door, lean in, and confirm the driver is a person hired. And my first thought was, why would you lean into a car to verify? What if it's not? They could grab you and pull you in and run away with you.
I'm really glad you asked that question, because I clearly didn't. I need to talk to my publisher, because what I should have said, and this is what I meant. Man, I'm really glad you brought this up. Really, because I need to clarify this. You would open the back right-hand door.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yes.
Opposite from the driver. Because I'm sitting there thinking, why would you open the driver's door or, the other front side door or whatever, where they could just grab you and pull you in?
Yeah, no, I'm really happy you brought this up, because I do need to talk to my publisher about this, because, that needs clarification. So I only go to the back right door and I open it up, and I will tell you that, okay, you're going to laugh when I tell you this story, but it's true. And I don't mean, so I had called a taxi, this is years ago, and I'm coming up to the back of the taxi, because I always approach from the back and from to the right. And I look at this guy, and he has a bumper sticker on his back bumper. And I'm going to tell you what the bumper sticker says in a second. But basically, I saw that bumper sticker, and I thought, he could be a nice guy, but no thanks. And I went over, and I stood up on the curb, and I was at the front passenger side, but away from the car. And I yelled at him and said, I got another car coming, thanks. And he was furious, but he drove on. But here's why. If you feel so good about putting a bumper sticker on the back bumper, and you're a taxi driver, and it says, there's a party in my pants and everyone's coming. And I thought, I'm not getting in this guy's car. I mean,
Yeah.
really, and I'm sure he's just a loser, but that's just, I have very strict rules and I hold to them. And that's one of the things that I always expect, when I teach, I tell them, give yourself rules. You have rules, and you don't break them. You don't break them because you're scared or worried or you're late for an appointment. You don't if you see something that triggers you, you just say move on. And yeah, so no, I always approach from the back, rear, back door.
That makes so much more sense.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so happy, Tracy, that you asked me that question. Thank you.
Don't mean to call you out on the carpet, but while we're talking about that, why don't you real quick give us your 3 rules for Uber, and before we wrap up.
Well, essentially, is you need to make sure that they're. And I'm going to redefine them a little bit because of this conversation. You always approach from the back, rear, and even if as your hands on the door handle, if you don't like what you even see in, you just, as I said, you wave them on and say that, no thanks, I got it. But if you open the door and everything looks okay and you confirm that this is the right person, the same thing is, you're not giving personal information. You don't have to engage in conversation. I mean, you can, I'm nice, but you don't have to engage in personal conversation. But you also notice things like the door. I'm not going to get in a car if I don't see a working door handle. And that is something to definitely think about. And you just need to because, I wrote about that in the book, but there's a story about the young woman who got in, and as soon as she got in, there was no door handle, and we'll never know what she was thinking because she was murdered. So, but you get on the phone and you make sure, and you let that person know that. So I get on a phone and even if I'm not, I'll pretend to call my husband and say, hey, yeah, I'm in this car. I just got hooked up with Uber and, his name is Bobby. Yeah, Bobby here. And I let the guy know right off the bat that I've already told someone on the phone where I am, who's driving me, where I'm going, what time it is.
Yeah, that's smart.
Yeah.
Very smart. Wow. I think we could talk for another 2 hours on this topic and not cover everything that we need to cover. So thank you so much for coming on today.
You're very welcome. And anytime, any day, I'll talk some more. I love this topic because I think it's so important.
Sounds good. And listeners, thank you for listening in. Definitely check below. Make sure that you get a copy of her book, her newly revised book.
Yeah.
And it's really important to make sure you read it yourself, have your kids read it with your kids, whatever you do. But we all need to know this stuff in this day and age. So
stay safe.
Absolutely.
Real fast, let me tell your reader or listeners, you get the book, or even if you don't get the book, play a game with yourself too when you're out, where you look at someone and you try to identify 5 features about that person when you're passing them. You get in the habit of doing that, and you learn to become a better witness to protect yourself.
Oh, wow. That's good to know. That's a good game to play.
Yep.
Awesome.
You stay safe.
All right. You too. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, listeners.
Bye-bye.
We'll talk to you next week.